Oh man, I always mess up your last name. Mary Torregrosa.
Yeah.
We're really, really excited. She's a poet. She's community kind of activist organizer. She is an ESL teacher involved with a great many things. It's very, very exciting to be joined this hour. Mary, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in? Let's start with the poetry. How'd you get involved in writing poetry?
Well, hi, Matt. It's really,
Good morning.
really good to see you. Um, I got involved in poetry, of course, as a young person, yeah, as a kid in school, um, and then just was always interested in it. And it was around the house a little bit because my mother liked poems. And then in high school and college, and I had friends who wrote poetry. But finally, here in California, I'm originally from Rhode Island, and in California, I was an artist. I would do collage art, and my kids were little. I couldn't have all those little pieces of paper and scissors around. So um, there was something going on in the community at the graffiti retreat in Baldwin Park, of all places. It was poetry. So I showed up one day with some poems in hand, and I thought, well, this is a great creative outlet. They had a mic. They had a group of people who were funny and interesting. And I started reading there. And I always thought, oh, I'm going to be at the mic, so I have to write another poem. And so that helped connect me to the poetry community in Southern California.
Yeah, yeah. So you also do a lot of work as you have a background in kind of being like, an activist, an organizer, but also an ESL teacher. Can you tell us the story of how you have an interesting road towards that profession? Can you give us a little background on that?
Yes. Well, my grandmother was an illiterate peasant from the Naples area. And when I was in kindergarten, my mother would sit me next to her. And as I studied my letters, I would teach her. So in a way, I've been teaching all my life. But I would ride the bus on my commute down to downtown LA at a travel agency. And I met a Chinese woman. She's from China, so I know she's Chinese. And she said, would you teach me English? So I went to the library and I made 2 copies of from a book that I had in the library. And I would bring her these and we would sit together and then we'd talk. And I'd do a lesson and then we'd chat. And finally, one day, she wasn't there. And I'm walking down the aisle with my papers in hand. And some woman says, teacher, teacher. So I'm not a teacher. I didn't answer her. She pulled on my jacket and she said, teacher, sit here. The Chinese girl is not here, so teach me English. And she was a middle-aged woman, probably in her 40s, from Mexico. And I said to her, I'm not a teacher. And she said, yes, you are a teacher. And I started working with her. And so I was teaching on the bus. At that time, I was married to someone, my first husband, and he was part of what they call a planetary lunch bunch. He was a scientist, and they always connected about families at the lunch hour. And he told someone about me teaching people on the bus. Well, his professor, Peter Haff, had a wife, Suzanne Haff, and she was also an ESL teacher. And she called me up and says, look, if you're teaching people on the bus, you can do this. You can do it as a job. And she set up our appointments. I couldn't disappoint her. I had to go to those appointments. I had to. She was the wife of my husband's boss. And so, yeah, I had to show up, and I did. And I'm really grateful I feel like growing up in my household, in my community, I didn't have any college connections. So no one really counseled me ever. All the decisions I made on my own. And but this one, she interfered. She got involved, and she counseled me. And wow, as a role model, I appreciated her stepping forward. But the woman on the bus who called me teacher and insisted, and she pointed to me and said, yes, she was like an angel.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your experiences in college and how that got you involved in some of the more activist pursuits that you would pursue throughout the rest of your life?
In college, I was interested in the arts and literature, but I joined, I wanted to do something that satisfied my need to be out in the community. And so I joined the Sex Information Referral Service. And that was in 1978 and 79. And in 1979, our outreach was education and support services for marginal communities. At that time, the gay community was underground, so to speak. But in any case, I remember we were going to go to a conference in New York City, and they said, don't come. Something's happening here. And it was all abuzz, I mean, among us. And it turned out to be AIDS. And so there was that was a very significant time. And I wasn't so much an activist for that cause. That all came after my involvement. We didn't know what it was. And we would be on phone conferences trying to figure out what is happening and how, is this communicative, and what's the story, because we couldn't find out any information publicly, and how do we get the word out and things like that. Well, when I came to California, then I picked up more on it. I was in Rhode Island at the time, and of course Los Angeles there became a bigger concern, and I didn't directly get involved in that. I was trying to find out what I wanted to do in life after college, but yeah, so that was a community, a portal to my understanding of racism and anti-racism.
Yeah, you were involved with an organization called Colors. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization and your involvement in it?
I smile because I spent 25 years with Colors, and we did an awful lot of work. It was very satisfying and interesting and instructive to me, and I was able to share. I had a lot of opportunity to share with others structures of racism, and then how to combat it through an anti-racist view. So Colors is Christians offering love to overcome racism in society through All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena. And so they had a significant presence as a ministry at that church, and weekly, monthly, all kinds of important activities. And then through them, I became interested in the disability mission, and All Saints was a premier setting for the marriage equality movement, and also for foster care, immigration with Father Francisco Garcia. So these were all elements. I didn't stay. I was interested in lots of things, and then what Colors was people would come through Colors, receive training, and they were able to move into their other ministries already having a training in anti-racism and how to be present as a white person in a community that was marginal. So I did a lot of training for other people. Colors, people would join Colors and then they'd say, well, I want to do something, because there was never an answer to racism. Keep on keeping on. So a lot of people felt unsatisfied because they couldn't fix it, you know. But what I saw it as when I was chair, I saw it, everybody who came through had a chance to find in themselves the vocabulary and an essential strategies and examine their own racism, and then move out of Colors to the other ministries with a little more readiness for listening skills and appreciation of the gravity, ongoing consciousness of what anti-racism is. It's an ongoing, constant. It's I hate to say it, it's never ending. So there's always work to do in this regard.
Yeah. So as I'm kind of curious, as a poet, what did as you know, somebody that's, you know, trained to write, you know, that trains their ear, did that help you as a listener to just like listen and process things in any kind of way that may have made this work a little bit easier or a little bit more? Were there any tools that you developed as a poet that helped in this particular way?
You hit the nail on the head. As an ESL teacher, I worked in Alhambra and in El Monte, and I've worked for 35 years. And I found myself a story listener. And, some of the stories I felt needed to be collected. A lot of people were not at the lower levels where I teach speech emergence and literacy. Those are my expertise. And to generate and inspire people and have them connect to another language, I would always begin with tell your story, right? Who are you? And everyone likes to talk about themselves. I'm doing it right now. You know, so all your other guests, this is a great, interesting opportunity. But I did that for my students. And there's a holistic approach where my illiterate students can't shine in the sense of producing a paragraph, a story, or getting an A on a written test. So I use art, my background, and I melded these two, and they create pictures. And then people would say, oh, you're drawing in class. I'd say, oh, no, wait till you see what comes out of this. Because then people would generate stories from what they drew. And then I could write exactly what they said. And I could say, here, this is what you said. And then they have the picture in their mind, the picture that they drew, the sentences I wrote, those are their words. Oh, I can read. And so these are moments that are very, very indelible in my mind. And I felt that some of them needed to be told. Can I read a story for you?
Yeah, please.
So some of the stories, of course, are beautiful and funny as all kinds of stories. This one is a very powerful story, and this is called Pueblo San Rafael. a witness narrative out of Guatemala. And the opening line is, "Epiphany is permission to know for sure." Maria Francisco y Francisco has no reverence for paper. She rubs a black crayon over the page. A purple man appears in the doorway of a building. In her drawing, there are many trees standing randomly in her Mayan village. "What are those sticks on the ground?" I ask. Maria has no nostalgia for runes or letters that slant and curve. Hers is a living God. The named thing displaces written words except for tally marks of how much or how many. What are those rows of windows here? What is for certain in the Aztec marigold? El pericon, a dye that turns the weaver's woolen thread to yellow. She plaits together the inseparable myth of resurrection in Ashokin. She scrapes lichen off rocks, which turns the dye a lilac hue. Water from a stone in her yarn. Fire leaves charcoal in its wake for rendering the blackened history of Pueblo San Rafael in a picture made with crayons on a desk in a classroom in Los Angeles. Maria says, "The church is black with ash, burned with everyone inside. The sticks are scattered arms and legs, and these are not windows. These are graves."
Yeah. Oh. So powerful. So yeah, so tell us about some of the venues that you frequent. We're trying to collect kind of oral histories about venues, presses, etc. So what are some of the places that you share your poetry and your short stories?
Well, because I decided not to go back to school and put my young family in debt, I've searched out a variety of ways to learn for myself. And I started with the emerging urban poets in the 80s in the back room of a library where they had set up a free workshop. In those days, there weren't too many, and I liked the public aspect of that, and I'm a big believer in a public sphere. So I started with the emerging urban poets for many years and then set out on my own. I teach workshops, and I have participated in local activities and some venues. Oh my gosh, there's so many now. Back in the day, there weren't as many, and lots of local things would pop up, and different hosts would create a space for us to read. So now I write with the Whittier's Writers Group, but I also was part of something Roberto Flores started down in the cafe in El Sereno, and that was a group right around the time of the community garden in South Central was being destroyed, and so he wanted to. His wife Cynthia Flores wanted to create a poetry group that would meet in all the subsequent community gardens that arose after South Central folded, well, was destroyed. And through that, there were a whole bunch of us with Abel Salas, who does the newspaper, and Don Newton, and gosh, was a few of us that were there. So we were part of a group that read in all the gardens. We would go from community garden, hold poetry there when those gardens were just developing, and more of them would show up. So I was part of that for a while, and I struck out on my own, Matt, because I needed to do some study in poetry. So that was kind of, I was doing poems of identity and narrative, memoir. And doing some work on the immigration issues, but I wanted to learn. So now I studied in Denver through the Lighthouse Project, and with at Ghost Ranch with Kimiko Han, she's a Japanese American poet, and in Provincetown, Cape Cod, and with Rachel McGibbons.
McGibbons? Yeah.
And so those were very interesting. New Mexico, Colorado, East Coast. I would take these small vacations because as I got older, my kids got older. They could sort of stay on their own, and I would take these vacations that I really never took. And so they were, I always held them very precious as a vacation.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make use of that vacation, so I did that through my travel. I'm going to close this door. My dog came in.
Okay, I thought I saw something. I thought I saw a little clearer there. Mary, is there any way you could share us with us another poem and tell us where to find you and your work and everything that you have upcoming?
Okay, I have a book called My Zocalo Heart, and the Zocalo is, of course, the grand square in many places, a community center outside where people gather in the evenings or gather for rallies. And so my Zocalo Heart, I always feel, was my English classroom, my ESL classroom, where people came from all over the world, and then we create this, wonderful community of people. Who knew that they would all come in the same place? How did they find me? How did they manage to travel and walk and find the directions and agree with their families that this is something they could do as adults, and the decisions they made and how they just entered these rooms, and then we were a class. So I always felt like the classroom was a Zocalo, and I tried to create the beloved community in my own life with my neighbors and in my spiritual centers and things like that. So I would like to read first a poem from the Wishing-Bone Cycle. They're narrative poems from the Swampy Cree Indians and translated by H.A. Norman. These are really old poems translated. So this is called Who Called the Mud Places? And I like this idea of naming. I'll tell you, he would always be out front walking when our families went walking. He would step in the mud before anyone else. Then he would call back to us, mud, mud. And when he found some mud ahead of us, we would lift the new walking babies up on our shoulders so they wouldn't get stuck in the mud. Then into the lake, laughing, he washed that mud off his feet. Sometimes he had mud all over him. He called the mud places each time we went walking. So his name got on him like that. He who called the mud places.
I love it. So we'll drop the link below where we can find that. I know I'm a little pressed for time, so maybe we can do a part two, Mary. I'm talking a little bit more about your book and a little more about what you've done. Just I got behind, but I thank you so much for joining us. Would you open to be doing a part two?
Yes, my pleasure. And I've enjoyed the other interviews you've done. I look forward to seeing more. Thank you for what you're doing, Matt.
Thank you, Mary. And we'll do a part two. We'll schedule a second part to talk more about your poetry. The
Thank
venues. That way.
you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.